Okay, so here's the next video. Let's talk about new leadership theories. So these are some of the more modern concepts of leadership, though I will note that some of this idea of implicit leadership theory is actually somewhat new. So this would actually probably also be appropriately considered in new leadership theories, though your book considers it a little bit earlier. So new leadership theories. This is, as I said, how we have tried to understand leadership now, more modern in the past couple of decades, as opposed to some of the ideas that have been with us over centuries. One of the first ideas that surrounds leadership now is transactional leadership. Transactional leadership is this perspective on leadership that acknowledges that some leaders are very exchange-based. Now here, this is different than social exchange as we talked about it in LMX. Here it is based on tangible exchange. So you do this for me, I do this for you. You work a certain number of hours, I give you a certain amount of money. That is what we call contingent reward, and that's a hallmark of transactional leadership. Basically, I influence you because I get you to do something for me, and I promise that you will get something in return. We also have management by exception. Management by exception is the extent to which the leader interferes, or rather, I should say, intervenes in what his or her subordinates is doing. Active management by exception is when a leader sees a problem that's about to occur or sees an issue that will take place in the future and tries to prevent it. Passive management by exception, however, is when a leader sort of lets the problems manifest and issues happen on their own and then only steps in after the fact, after the problem has become apparent. Now, somewhat related to leadership, or rather transactional leadership, is laissez-faire leadership. Laissez-faire leadership is the avoidance or absence of leadership. So this is where you avoid making decisions, where you avoid any form of leadership at all. Basically, laissez-faire leadership is non-existent leadership. Laissez-faire leaders hesitate and don't take action. They're often absent when you need them. They're effectively non-existent leaders. Now, we contrast these with transformational leadership. Transformational leaders are those leaders that attempt to motivate subordinates to transcend their self-interest and achieve more than they think is possible. Transformational leaders offer a purpose that transcends short-term goals and focuses on higher order intrinsic needs. These are from two different textbooks, one including your own. So basically, transformational leadership operates or is effective because the subordinate identifies with the needs of the leader and vice versa. So whatever the leader is communicating in terms of their vision for your organization or even their vision for the world, that resonates with you. And so they're able to appeal to your desires, your wants, and your needs. And that's how they influence you. That's how they, become your leader. Transformational leadership is based on 4 characteristics: charisma, idealized influence, inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, and individualized consideration. Charisma, idealized influence, refers to the interpersonal attraction that the leader is able to generate, the extent to which people just want to be around the leader. Do they enjoy talking to him or her? Do they find the leader to be an appealing person? Inspirational motivation is another aspect of transformational leadership. This is where the leader articulates a vision that is appealing and inspiring to people. So is there vision for your organization, for your country, for whatever group or entity that you are a part of? Is it a vision that inspires you? Do they have a worldview that gets you motivated? That's what a transformational leader does. Transformational leaders also rely on intellectual stimulation. So they challenge assumptions. They are risk takers, and they solicit followers' ideas. So they're not, afraid of intellect, and they're not afraid of being smart. They are interested in challenging people and challenging our understandings of the way things have been done. Then there's individualized consideration. Transformational leaders are those leaders who are able to attend to individuals' needs, and they actually act as a mentor or coach, and they listen to the followers' concerns and needs. So when you are the subordinate of a transformational leader, you genuinely believe that this leader has your best interest, or not your best interest, but actually listens to you and understands what you want and what you need and is paying attention to you. Now, is transformational leadership and transactional, or are transformational leadership and transacted or transactional leadership mutually exclusive? No. Research would suggest that they aren't. Indeed, some research um, would suggest that transactional and transformational leadership can augment each other. That transformational leadership builds upon the foundation set by transactional leadership. And if we go back to motivation, our motivation module, this makes sense, right? It's just like um, appealing to hygiene and satisfaction factors, or sorry, motivation factors, where you need a leader who, yes, is going to appeal to your understanding of this is what you do for me and this is what I give to you. So you understand if I do these tasks, this person will give me money, benefits, etc. But then the transformational leadership motivates you beyond the very basic nature of if you do this for me, I will do this for you, because that can only sustain you so far. The transformational leadership then actually motivates you above and beyond what we would expect from someone just knowing that, well, if you pay me, I will do this thing for you. Some research might also suggest that transactional leadership is a byproduct of what a transformational leader does, because part of articulating a vision and part of being transformational is being able to articulate to the person, this is what you are going to do for me, and this is what I am going to do for you. So the point here is not that we should view transactional and transformational leadership as being mutually exclusive, but it's possible that they can actually build upon each other. Now, is there a downside to transformational leadership? You bet. Transformational leadership, some recent research has shown, can lead to dependence, can lead to people relying on their leaders far more than they actually should, and can actually really thwart their development and keep them from achieving what they should achieve, or rather what they would want to achieve. It can also lead to or be a byproduct of some level of narcissism. The transformational leaders may also possess narcissistic tendencies, which we will revisit at the end of this module. Related to transformational leadership is charismatic leadership. Now, there's a lot of overlap here. So if you're saying this sounds effectively the same, don't worry, it's very close. Charismatic leadership refers to a leader who is confident in themselves, confident in others, communicates high expectations, and is also a role model. Um, they also have other key characteristics like vision and articulation. So they have a vision that proposes a better future. They take on personal risks. So they're willing to take on high personal risks in order to achieve the goals or ends that they want to achieve as a leader. They are sensitive to follower needs, which I've already talked about with transformational leadership, and they have unconventional behavior. So once again, getting at some of that intellectual stimulation aspect of transformational leadership, they engage in behavior that is perceived as new and counter to norms. So that is what a charismatic leader is. Now, do situations influence charismatic leadership? Absolutely. Some research would suggest that under situations of high stress and uncertainty, charismatic leaders are far more likely to emerge and be effective. This is essentially what we find when fascist dictators rise to power. When there's a high level of stress and uncertainty among a group of people, they find charismatic leaders to be very appealing. I mean, Hitler was a charismatic leader, and that's not to say that he did good things with his leadership, absolutely not, but Hitler rose to power because Germany was under a great amount of economic stress and uncertainty, and so his charismatic leadership was far more effective under those circumstances. Research has supported that this is something that is not just, a cause for World War II effectively, but something that we see in other situations beyond the rise of fascist dictators in Germany. We also find that charismatic leaders are far more effective when the tasks that people are doing require an ideological component. And this also makes sense that someone who is relying on ideology about personal needs and wants and desires is going to be more effective when you are working on a task that draws on those ideals that you have. We also find that top level managers tend to enact, or rather leverage charismatic leadership a little bit better than lower level managers. And this once again makes sense. It doesn't really necessarily it doesn't make intuitive sense for a lower level manager to engage in charismatic leadership, because what is How can your lower level manager inspire you? Whereas your top level manager can engage in big picture activities and therefore capitalize on the um, ideological component of their leadership. Now let's talk about authentic leadership. Authentic leadership relates to when a leader knows who they are, what they believe in and value, and they act on those values and beliefs openly and accordingly. In other words, this is a leader who gets people to follow them because they are true to oneself. Now, we find that authentic leadership leads to follower and group OCB's performance and follower need satisfaction. Once again, the way in which an authentic leader influences people is through their authenticity. People like Bernie Sanders, for example, regardless of his politics, the reason that people like him so much is they believe that he's, quote unquote, real, that he's the real deal. On the other side of the aisle, this is part of the narrative that propelled Donald Trump to the presidency, that he was unfiltered and that he was real. And because people find authenticity appealing, they respond to leaders like that. And so this is why we see authentic leaders rise to power and have an impact on their followers. Servant leadership refers to when a leader is focused not so much on their self, but on truly serving others. Bill Gates has a quote here that says, "As we look ahead into the next century, leaders will be those who empower others." We can only hope, but servant leaders, are those people who do just that, who focus on empowering others. So there are certain facets listed here about what makes a servant leader different from all the other kinds of leaders we've talked about. The previous forms of leadership that we've talked about, though they do have these ideological components, nevertheless, the leader is the focus of that. And though the leader does listen to his or her subordinates, their subordinates are still second to the leader's desires, the leader's wants. So the leader is never going to give up what he or she wants for their followers. A servant leader, on the other hand, would, because a servant leader is focused on empowering and developing people. A servant leader has humility, and as we know, transformational leaders can be narcissists. They're also authentic, so we do have some level of authentic leadership here. They also exercise interpersonal acceptance. So they accept the people for who they are, they provide direction, and they are stewards. So they are trying to care for organizations, not necessarily dominate organizations. So that's what makes a servant leader distinct from the other kinds of leaders that we've talked about. Then we have ethical leadership. Your book doesn't really talk about it directly, but does refer to it. So I thought it was appropriate to explain what ethical leadership is. This was defined by Brown and Trevino. It is the demonstration of normatively appropriate conduct through personal actions and interpersonal relationships, and the promotion of such conduct to followers through two-way communication, reinforcement, and decision-making. In other words, an ethical leader is someone who behaves ethically and in the way that they treat others, encourages their subordinates to behave in ethical ways as well. We see some of this in our founding fathers in the United States, this idea of ethical leadership, especially in terms of the apocryphal stories we're told about our leaders, like George Washington's "I cannot tell a lie" when he cut down his father's cherry tree. So we have these ideas that our leaders should be ethical, that they should be people who are beyond reproach, morally speaking. And in that way, an ethical leader, if they do act in such a way, if they do act in a way that is ethical, they encourage their followers to be ethical as well. Now let's put all of it together in some way. So authentic and ethical leadership strongly correlate with transformational leadership. So we find that there is a strong overlap, in other words, between the aspects of authentic and ethical leadership and transformational leadership. Servant leadership, however, seems to be something unique relative to transformational leadership. So the research would suggest that there might be something different going on with servant leadership relative to transformational leadership. The reason we focus on transformational leadership here, for the record, is that transformational leadership generally is found to have a positive impact on a lot of employee outcomes. So some people would argue that transformational leadership is something we would want to strive for, and indeed I would recommend that. But the point here is to note that servant leadership provides something above and beyond what transformational leadership provides, whereas authentic and ethical leadership may not necessarily do that. They may effectively be either the same thing or not necessarily producing anything different than what transformational leadership does. So this is a relatively shorter video. I'm going to stop here. And then the last video is going to be one about gender and leadership and culture, as well as the dark triad. I consider these to be the fun topics of leadership. So I'll see you all in the next video.